Grand Ole Opry legend Stringbean Akeman and his wife were murdered in their home back in 1973.
Before his passing, Roy Clark shared details about one of country music's darkest nights, the tragic loss of his friend and fellow performer David Stringbean Akeman. For years, fans have wondered what really happened and why this story still stirs so much emotion in Nashville. Join us as we look back at Roy Clark's revelations. The early life of David Stringbean Akeman. David Akeman, better known to the world as Stringbean, came into the world on June 17, 1915, in the hills of Jackson County, Kentucky. His early years were shaped by the land, the times, and the close-knit family that raised him. Jackson County was a rural place where most families lived off farming and simple labor. Life was plain, but it was also full of challenges. Families had to stretch every penny, and survival often came before comfort. David was one of several children in the Akeman household. His parents worked hard to keep food on the table, and from an early age he learned that every family member had to do their part. There wasn't much money for extras or luxuries. If something was broken, it had to be fixed rather than replaced. If the family wanted entertainment, they created it themselves with music, stories, or gatherings with neighbors. This simple way of life planted in him a deep respect for hard work and for the small joys that came from family and community. As a boy, David wanted a banjo of his own, but money was scarce. Buying an instrument simply wasn't possible for his family at the time. Still, he wasn't the kind to give up easily. He gathered what he could, an old shoebox, a stick, and some strings, and built himself a banjo-like instrument. It didn't look like much, but it allowed him to practice and begin learning the sounds that fascinated him. That homemade banjo became his first step into music. Later, his determination paid off. When he was still young, David made a trade that showed both his love for music and the sacrifices country families often had to make. He gave away 2 chickens in exchange for a real banjo. To him, the trade was worth it 100 times over. That instrument became his closest companion, and it rarely left his side. From that day on, he practiced constantly, teaching himself songs and rhythms until the banjo became an extension of who he was. But before music could fully take him away from farm life, David had to live through some of the hardest years in American history. The Great Depression hit when he was still a young man. Across the country, banks failed, jobs disappeared, and families who already struggled had even less to survive on. For people like the Akemans, the Depression was more than just headlines in the news. It was empty cupboards, long days of work with little pay, and neighbors losing farms they had worked their whole lives to keep. To help support himself and his family, David joined the Civilian Conservation Corps, a government program created to give young men jobs during the Depression. His work with the Corps took him into the outdoors, where he helped build roads, plant trees, and improve public land. And soon the world would see how this tall, skinny kid from Kentucky turned those early lessons into a career that left people laughing, singing, and remembering him for decades to come. But as his story grew brighter, so did the shadows around him, especially the one thing he could never let go of, his fear of losing money. Becoming Stringbean. By the time David Akeman reached his late teens and early 20s, music was no longer just a hobby. It was becoming a path forward. He had already gained a reputation in his Kentucky community for being both a skilled banjo player and a natural entertainer. Whenever there was a local contest or a gathering, he was there with his banjo in hand. He could win people over, not only with his playing, but also with his humor. He had a knack for slipping in a funny line or a playful comment between songs, and that mix of music and comedy made him stand out from the start. It was during one of these contests that David caught the attention of an old-time musician named Asa Martin. Martin was a respected performer in Kentucky, and he often invited younger talents to join him on stage. He was impressed by the tall, skinny young man who played the banjo with such heart, while also making the audience laugh. Martin asked David to join his group, giving him the chance to perform beyond just local gatherings. But David didn't yet have the stage name people would come to know him by. One night, when Asa Martin introduced him on stage, he blanked on David's last name. Looking at his lanky frame, Martin quickly filled the gap by calling him Stringbeans. The crowd liked it, and the name stuck. Over time, it was shortened to Stringbean, and that became David's permanent identity in the world of music. From then on, the name fit him as much as his banjo did. With a stage name and growing experience, Stringbean's career began to move forward. His big break came in the early 1940s when he joined Bill Monroe's band, the Bluegrass Boys. Bill Monroe was already becoming known as the father of bluegrass, and his band was the place where new talent could shine. For Stringbean, joining Monroe's group was both an honor and a chance to learn from some of the best musicians of the time. After leaving Monroe's group, Stringbean began working with other performers, and one of the most important partnerships of his life was with Grandpa Jones. Jones was another banjo player and comic entertainer who shared Stringbean's love for old-time music and humor. The two became close friends as well as professional partners, performing together in shows that blended songs with lighthearted comedy. Their chemistry on stage made them audience favorites, and they became fixtures in the world of country entertainment. The real turning point in Stringbean's career came when he started performing at the Grand Ole Opry in Nashville. The Opry was the heart of country music, and to appear there was considered a mark of true success. For Stringbean, the Opry was more than just a place to play. It was where he developed the stage persona that made him beloved across the country. On the Opry stage, Stringbean combined his banjo playing with his comedy routines, creating a performance style that was all his own. He also developed a signature look that audiences never forgot. He wore oversized shirts, baggy pants held up with suspenders, and old-fashioned hats. The outfit made him look a little silly, but that was the point. It made people laugh before he even spoke a word. Paired with his music and humor, the costume helped shape the image of Stringbean as the humble, funny banjo man who never took himself too seriously. And soon, Stringbean's life would change again when he met the woman who would be by his side for the rest of his days. Life with Estelle. In 1945, just as World War II was coming to an end and the country was beginning to settle back into peacetime life, David Stringbean Akeman married Estelle Stanfill. Their marriage became the steady center of his life, giving him the sense of home and comfort he had always valued. Estelle was known by everyone who met her as quiet, kind, and deeply supportive. She didn't seek the spotlight and preferred to stay in the background, but she was always proud of Stringbean and stood by him at every stage of his career. The couple's relationship was often described as one of quiet devotion. They didn't have children, but that never seemed to lessen the strength of their bond. Friends and fellow musicians noticed how much they cared for one another. Stringbean was the one making crowds laugh and filling stages with music, but when he was off stage, it was Estelle who gave him stability and peace. They weren't loud about their love, but everyone could see it in the way they lived together. Not long after they were married, Stringbean and Estelle settled into a home that perfectly matched their personalities. They chose to live in a small log cabin in Ridgetop, Tennessee. While many of Stringbean's peers used their fame and money to buy larger houses, expensive cars, or other luxuries, the Akemans chose a different path. Their cabin was simple, rustic, and cozy. It had a wood stove for heat, a garden that Estelle tended carefully, and chickens that provided eggs. Most of their meals were made from scratch, often with ingredients they had grown or raised themselves. This kind of life might have surprised some fans who saw Stringbean on stage each week at the Grand Ole Opry or on the popular television show Hee Haw. To outsiders, it might have seemed unusual that a nationally known performer lived in such a modest way. But to Stringbean and Estelle, it was the only way that felt right. They didn't need flashy things to feel successful. Their happiness came from simple living, gardening, fishing, hunting, and enjoying quiet time together when the music and laughter of the stage were done. One reason they lived so modestly was Stringbean's deep distrust of banks. This distrust went all the way back to his boyhood during the Great Depression. As a young man, he had seen families lose their savings overnight when banks closed their doors. He never forgot the fear and helplessness that spread during those years, and it shaped the way he handled money for the rest of his life. Even after he found success and steady pay from music, he refused to keep his money in banks. Instead, Stringbean chose to keep his earnings close. He carried cash with him, and at home he found unusual hiding places to stash bills. Some say he tucked money inside the chimney. Others believed it was hidden under the floorboards or behind loose bricks in the walls. It was never certain how much he had hidden, but stories spread quickly in town. Rumors began to grow that Stringbean might be keeping thousands of dollars tucked away inside that little cabin. But while their home life looked peaceful on the outside, their habits, especially the hidden cash, would one day attract dangerous attention. And before long, that attention would come from the worst kind of people. The fatal night. For most people who knew David Stringbean Akeman, November 10, 1973, began just like any other Saturday. Stringbean had a routine he rarely broke, and this night was no different. He and Estelle prepared for their weekly trip to Nashville, where he was scheduled to perform at the Grand Ole Opry. At the Opry that evening, Stringbean was in good spirits. He played his banjo, told his jokes, and entertained the crowd just as he always did. Fellow musicians later recalled that nothing about the night seemed unusual. Estelle, as always, was there with him. She was a quiet presence backstage, chatting politely with others but keeping her attention on her husband. For Stringbean, having her by his side was simply part of the life they shared. When the Opry wrapped up, Stringbean followed his usual pattern. He and Estelle left the show and headed back home to their cabin in Ridgetop, Tennessee. The drive was routine, and by all accounts, nothing seemed out of the ordinary. To the outside world, it was just another Saturday night. But while Stringbean was playing music and making audiences laugh, trouble was already waiting at his home. Two cousins, John and Marvin Brown, both with histories of theft and petty crime, had broken into the Akeman cabin earlier that evening. They had grown up poor and restless, often in trouble with the law, and in recent months, they had become more reckless. The Browns had heard the same rumors that had been circulating for years, that Stringbean distrusted banks and kept large amounts of cash hidden in his house. Stories spread through town that thousands of dollars might be tucked away in his chimney, under his floors, or behind the walls. To the Browns, these rumors sounded like opportunity. On that November night, they forced their way into the cabin and waited. Their plan was simple: ambush Stringbean when he came home, frighten him, and take whatever money they could find. They were convinced there was a hidden fortune inside the modest little home. When Stringbean and Estelle arrived home after the Opry, it was late, close to midnight. They parked the car and walked toward the cabin, unaware of the danger inside. Stringbean went in first. Almost immediately, he was confronted by the Browns. Accounts say that John Brown fired the first shot, hitting Stringbean near the doorway. He collapsed and died almost instantly. Estelle, terrified, ran back out of the cabin and toward the car, hoping to escape or find help. But she didn't make it far. Marvin Brown chased her down and shot her outside near the vehicle. In only a matter of minutes, the couple's quiet life was ended in a burst of violence. The Browns searched the cabin, desperate to find the fortune they believed was hidden there. But what they found was far less than they expected. Despite their belief in thousands of dollars being stashed away, only a small amount of cash was discovered. The rest of the rumored treasure was nowhere to be seen. The next morning, Stringbean's close friend and fellow Opry star Grandpa Jones arrived at the cabin. The two had made plans to go hunting together, a regular activity they often shared. Jones pulled up to the home expecting to find Stringbean ready with his gear. Instead, he was met with a sight that haunted him for the rest of his life. Near the car, Jones saw Estelle's body. In shock, he hurried toward the house and discovered Stringbean lying inside just beyond the doorway. Realizing what had happened, he immediately left to get help. Later, he would describe the moment as one of the most painful memories he ever carried. Though he lived for many years after, Grandpa Jones could never forget finding his dear friends in such a tragic state. News of the murders spread quickly, sending shockwaves through Nashville and the wider country music world. Fans, fellow performers, and neighbors alike were stunned. The idea that this humble, kind-hearted couple could be taken in such a brutal way felt impossible to accept. And soon, the search for justice would begin, uncovering details that shocked both fans and friends. The hunt for the killers. The shocking murders of Stringbean and Estelle Akeman left the Nashville community reeling. Friends and fans mourned, while neighbors whispered about who could have carried out such a cruel act. It didn't take long for suspicion to begin circling, and the trail eventually pointed toward two cousins already known to law enforcement, John and Marvin Brown. In the days following the murders, the little town of Ridgetop was buzzing with talk. Everyone knew about the long-standing rumors of Stringbean's hidden money, and many guessed right away that robbery had been the motive. But it was the sudden behavior of John and Marvin Brown that first drew real attention. Both men had criminal records, mostly for theft, and their reputations made people wary. But what stood out most was their spending. Just after the murders, locals noticed that the Browns suddenly seemed to have more cash than usual. They were buying things they normally couldn't afford, flashing money around, and talking too freely. In a small town where everyone noticed small changes, this stood out immediately. Some who knew them quietly passed their concerns to the police. It was the kind of loose talk and showy behavior that made investigators believe the cousins might indeed be connected to the crime. Police began watching the Browns closely. They collected statements from locals who had noticed the sudden change in their habits. Some reported overhearing the men speak about Stringbean or about money in ways that didn't sit right. Others pointed out how nervous they seemed when the subject of the murders came up. Investigators also searched for physical evidence. While much of the crime scene had already told the story of what happened inside the cabin, the key was connecting it directly to the Browns. Over time, police gathered enough details to build a strong case. A few stolen items traced back to the Akeman home were found in the Browns' possession. Combined with the suspicious timeline of their movements and the unusual spending spree, the case against them grew stronger by the day. It wasn't long before the police felt confident they had their men. Both cousins were arrested within weeks of the murders, bringing a small sense of relief to a community still shaken by the violent deaths of two beloved neighbors. The arrests were only the beginning. The trial that followed attracted enormous attention, not just from the local community but from the entire country music world. Fans wanted justice for Stringbean and Estelle, and the courtroom became the stage for that process. Testimonies came from several directions. Grandpa Jones, who had been the one to discover the bodies, gave emotional statements about the morning he walked into the scene. Fellow musicians from the Opry also spoke about Stringbean's character and routine, helping to establish the timeline of his final hours. Investigators laid out the evidence they had gathered, from the Browns' suspicious spending to their possession of stolen items. In the end, the court handed down heavy sentences. John Brown, the shooter, received 198 years in prison, a sentence designed to make sure he would never walk free again. Marvin Brown received a lighter sentence, but still one long enough to keep him behind bars for the rest of his life. He later died in prison, never seeing release. And even with the killers locked away, one mystery still haunted everyone. Whatever became of Stringbean's hidden money? The hidden fortune mystery. When David Stringbean Akeman and his wife, Estelle, were murdered in 1973, the crime itself shocked Nashville and the country music world. But in the days and years that followed, another layer of the story began to surface, a mystery about money hidden away in the Akeman cabin. It turned out that the rumors people had whispered about for years contained a surprising amount of truth. When investigators went through the Akeman cabin after the murders, they found money stashed in unusual places. Small bundles of bills were hidden in a pair of boots, tucked into the chimney, and sealed behind parts of the cabin's walls. By the time everything was counted, the hidden cash added up to around $20,000, a significant amount in the early 1970s, especially for someone who lived so modestly. For those who knew Stringbean, this discovery was not a complete shock. He had lived through the Great Depression, a time when banks failed and many families lost everything. That experience left him with a lifelong distrust of financial institutions. He preferred to keep his earnings close by, where he could see and touch them. To him, hiding money in his home felt safer than trusting it to anyone else. Still, the exact amount surprised people. Stringbean had been careful with money all his life, and while he made a good living through music and television, nobody expected him to be sitting on thousands of dollars in secret. Once the first stash of money was found, speculation took off. Neighbors and fans alike began to wonder just how much more Stringbean might have hidden. Some people claimed he had tucked away tens of thousands of dollars more. Others insisted the cabin was practically a vault, filled with secret compartments waiting to be uncovered. These rumors quickly turned the Akeman home into an object of curiosity. Long after the murders, stories circulated about intruders and treasure hunters sneaking onto the property at night, hoping to find another hidden bundle. While authorities secured the cabin after the crime, interest in the so-called fortune never really faded. The tale of hidden wealth became a part of Stringbean's legend, just as memorable as his music and comedy. People told the story of a man who distrusted banks so much that he scattered money around his cabin, creating a mystery that lasted for decades. Then, more than 20 years later, the rumors proved true once again. In 1996, when the cabin was undergoing renovations, workers uncovered another hidden stash. Behind a wall, sealed away for decades, they found around $20,000 more in cash. By then, however, the bills were worthless. Time and damp conditions had ruined them. The paper was decayed, and the currency could not be exchanged. What had once been a small fortune had become nothing more than a curiosity, physical proof of Stringbean's habits, but no longer of any monetary value. This second discovery only fueled more speculation. If money had been hidden so deeply in the walls, how much else might still be buried in the cabin or surrounding property? While no further finds have ever been reported, the idea of undiscovered stashes has never fully gone away. The mystery of Stringbean's hidden fortune was matched by another struggle, the question of who would inherit what he left behind. Stringbean and Estelle had no children, and after their deaths, no will was found. That left the estate to be sorted out in court. The legal battles dragged on as relatives from both sides made claims. Eventually, most of the property and belongings were awarded to Estelle's family. But the disputes caused tension, and the hidden money discoveries only complicated matters. Each new find raised questions about who had the right to it and who would ultimately benefit. In the end, much of Stringbean's estate was divided through the courts, but the questions about his hidden wealth left a shadow over the process. His choice to hide money rather than trust it to banks had not only shaped his daily life, but also left a legacy of mystery and conflict after his death. And even as the fortune mystery lingered, fans continued to remember what truly made Stringbean special: the music and laughter he brought to the world. The dark aftermath. Even decades after the murders of Stringbean and Estelle Akeman, the story did not rest quietly. New developments, surprising decisions, and lingering questions kept the tragedy alive in the public conversation. One of the most shocking moments came in 2014, when one of the killers, John Brown, was released from prison. When John Brown was convicted in the 1970s, the sentence was meant to ensure he would never walk free again. He had received 198 years in prison, a term that left no doubt about the seriousness of his crime. To many people, that sentence brought a small measure of comfort. It meant the man responsible for pulling the trigger would spend the rest of his life behind bars. But in 2014, more than 40 years after the murders, news broke that John Brown had been granted parole. He was 64 years old at the time, and parole officials argued that he no longer posed a threat to society. The decision sparked outrage. Country music fans, friends of Stringbean, and members of Estelle's family all voiced their disappointment. For them, the brutality of the crime was something that could never be repaid with time served. Many believed Brown's release was an insult to the memory of the couple and to the community that had never fully healed from the loss. Making matters worse, Brown's own words after his release did little to soften feelings. He gave conflicting statements in interviews, sometimes claiming regret, other times sounding detached and unapologetic. Many felt he lacked real remorse for what he had done, which only deepened the anger toward the parole decision. The release of John Brown also brought old questions back into focus, questions that had never been fully answered. One of the biggest mysteries was whether John and Marvin Brown had acted alone. Some locals long suspected that a third accomplice might have been involved. The theory was that someone else had either been at the cabin that night or had helped plan the crime. Nothing was ever proven, but the suspicion lingered. Another unanswered question was how the Browns knew Stringbean's schedule so well. His routine was steady: perform at the Opry on Saturday nights, then head home. But did the Browns simply take advantage of a well-known habit, or had someone tipped them off? Some speculated that an insider from the Opry or a neighbor might have provided information, though no evidence ever surfaced to support that theory. Over time, the unanswered questions gave rise to countless theories and rumors. Some believed the Browns had inside knowledge from someone close to Stringbean, while others were sure they had acted alone but simply guessed his schedule correctly. As for the hidden fortune, the rumors only grew after the 1996 discovery of another $20,000 in the cabin walls. If money was still being uncovered more than 2 decades later, who was to say there wasn't more? This fueled speculation that either the Browns had stolen a larger amount than anyone realized, or that more hidden cash might still be waiting somewhere, undiscovered. To this day, these questions have no clear answers. Theories continue to circulate among fans, historians, and locals who remember the events. For many, the mystery is part of what keeps the story alive, even as the tragedy itself remains painful to recall. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and hit the notification bell so you don't miss what's coming next.